All right, we're back and we're picking up where we left off talking about object arrays, and we're practicing the concept using string arrays, particularly with some CodingBat. Here I am at CodingBat. We're looking at, under the Java section, of course, AP1 words count. It says, given an array of strings, return the count of the number of strings with the given length. Okay, here's some examples. Let's say you have this string array, A, B, 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 C, C, C. It wants to know how many of those strings have a length of 1. All right, well, I showed you in the last video how we can basically loop through a string array just like it's any other array. But the important thing to note is that the individual elements are strings. And so we can use those and call string methods. Let's get started. I'm going to create some type of integer to keep track of how many strings I come across that meet my criteria. So I'm going to start off with an integer I'm going to call count. I plan on returning it after the fact, but we're ready to start looping. I want to loop through words. Okay, I'm going to use a for loop initially, and I think we can use a for each loop to kind of demonstrate the idea as well, so we'll do both solutions. So I'm going to create a for loop starting integer I at index 0. We're looping through words, so as long as I is less than words.length, and I'm going to do an I++. We're starting at the very beginning, working our way towards the end. Okay, what I want to do is with each iteration, get the current string. Okay, the current string, well, words is the array. I want to pull the current element, which is at index I. So this is a string array. This is a single string. All right, I'm going to do that again. Words is a string array. Words at I is a single string. So what I've highlighted, it is a string. I want to know how long is that? Really what I want to know is, does that length equal to the one that I'm looking for? So we're going to put this in an if statement. I'm looping through. With each iteration, I'm going to ask, is the current string's length equal to the amount that I'm looking for? If it is, I'm going to increase my count by 1. And after the loop is over, I've considered every string in my array will return count. Okay, if you take a look here, this is the only time I really needed an index, but all I'm using it for is to reference the current element. So what that means is we could use a for each loop in order to accomplish this. So I'm going to scrap this. I'm still going to keep my count. We're ultimately still going to return count, but I'm going to do a for each loop. What I'm looping through is words. It's a string array. That means that each individual element is a string. I'm going to call that whatever I want. In this case, word makes a lot of sense, right? If we're going to call the integer or the string array words, a single element is a word. So for each string, which I will refer to as word, end words. With each iteration, I'm going to ask, is the current element's length? Well, with each iteration, the current element is word. Right? This is effectively replacing words at I. If word.length is equal to the length that I'm looking for, then we will increase our count. And we get the same solution. Ultimately, the important thing here is like how clean this is relative to a for loop. Right. Let's go to the next one. Words front. Given an array of strings, return a new array containing the first n strings. N will be in the range 1 to length. So this is effectively a precondition. We don't necessarily have to look for that. So let's look at an example. They give us this array. And what they want is the first element, right? But this is coming back out as a new array. So notice our return type is string array. In this example here, it's effectively the same array, but they want the first 2 elements. Well, they tell us in advance how many elements they want, right? In this value that's coming in. That's super important because we need to basically create our array length up front. So inside my method, the first thing I'm going to do is create a string array. I'm going to call it RTN. I plan on returning it. It is a new string array with a length of n. Right now, it's filled with null, but depending, right, in this example, it would just be one null. In this example, it would be two nulls. What I need to go through is this array and transfer the first n elements here. Okay, I'm ready to start looping. Now, I basically have to use a for loop here because I don't want to go through the whole thing. There's no reason to. You could use a for each loop, but that's like unnecessarily messy. You got to use some extra variables to kind of track things. Just use a for loop and be done with it. So we're going to create our for loop. We'll start I at index 0. As long as I is less than, and here's the important thing, n. Right? I'm going to get the first n elements. Right? Here in this example, n is 2. So I will do 0, 1, that's a total of 2, and then stop. I++. No if statement check here. I'm just unconditionally copying the element over, and these indices line up. What do I mean? Well, it's going to go from index 0 to index 0, right? I'm taking this one, index 0 to index 0, index 1 to index 1, index 2 to index 2. That's perfect. So there's no need to offset. There's no if statement check or anything like that. So we're just going to transfer the element into RTN, my destination array, at the same index, but it's coming from words at that exact same index. Right? There's an I to I, no offset needed translation. I don't know. Okay. After my loop is finished, I have done the first n. I've transferred those over. We're going to return RTN. Beautiful. Okay, and again, a for each loop doesn't make very much sense here because I need to stop early in most test cases. Okay, we're going to go next, but quite a bit because all I'm doing is, oh, no, sorry. This very next one involves a string array. Let's take a look. Give an array of strings, return a new, oh, that's why I skipped this one. We don't quite know array lists. Let's keep going. Aha, matchup is the next one I want to look at. Given two arrays, right? We have string array A, string array B. They're the same length, that's important, containing strings. Compare the first string in one array to the first string in the other array, the second to the second, and so on. Count the number of times the two strings are non-empty and start with the same char. The strings may be any length including 0. Okay, so let's look at an example. Here we have string array A, which is filled with these elements, string array B, which is filled with these elements, and we ultimately return a value, an integer, of 1. That's because this element compared to this element, they start with the same letter, right? This element compared to this element, they do not. This element compared to this element, they do not. Okay, so it is looking at aligning indices to see if those two strings are non-empty and they start with the same char, right? This non-empty part is pretty important because if we were to try to get the first character of an empty string, we would go out of bounds. I'm trying to access the character at what index? 0. And if there isn't even a 0 index, we're out of bounds. Okay. Ultimately, I'm returning an integer. It's a count. So I'm going to start that variable. They tell us these things have the same length, which means that we can create our array. And I do need an index here, so a for each loop does not make very much sense. But I get to pick whatever array I want. A or B, doesn't matter, they have the same length. So as long as I is less than a.length, I++. So here's my for loop pattern. We're going to loop through. With each iteration, I want to get the string from A, I want to get the string from B, and I really want to ask, are the two characters the same? Okay, let's get the string from A. That is A at index I. What I really want to ultimately compare are the characters, the first characters. So we're going to do a char at. You could also use substring here. We're going to get char at index 0, right? Keep in mind, A is a string array. A at I is a string. A at I dot char at 0 is a single character. I want to compare that character to B at the exact same index, right? So I'm going to go into string array B. I'm going to get B at I. That is a string. I'm going to ask, is the very first character the same as A's? Right? So let's plug this into an if statement. I'm asking if the current string from A's first character is equal to the current string from B's first character. If so, we're going to do a count plus plus. After a loop is over, we're going to return our count, and I already know there's going to be a slight issue, so hold tight. But let's run this and see where we go wrong. Sorry, different issue. I was using the length method. When we're talking about an array, it is a property, a instance variable. String index out of bounds, exception, string index out of range 0, out of range 0, out of range 0. Well, that's coming from these empty strings that we have, right? As I told you, if we try to pull the first character from an empty string, that's out of bounds. So, in order for me to do this check, what I really need to do is to make sure that those strings are not empty. A couple of ways, actually a lot of ways that you can end up checking that, right? I need to maybe ask, and you could use ands, you could nest if statements. I think maybe nested if statements matter, or clean. What I'm going to do with this if statement is see, is A not empty? Is it a non-empty string? How do I know? One way is recognizing what the length of this is. In the case of an empty string, its length is 0, right? So if a.length is equal to 0, more importantly, in order for me to continue on with this, right, in order for me to do this check, I would want to know, is it not equal to 0? If the length of A does not equal 0, well, it's a non-empty string. Don't forget, we need to also check B. So we'll say, and B.length does not equal 0. If this and this is true, that means that both of my strings are non-empty. I am safe to enter the if statement and do this. Again, you could combine these two if statements using and, or you could nest the if statements. I like to nest it because I think it's a little clean. Let's run that and figure out where our length went wrong. Cannot find symbol length. What did I do here? What is A? A is a string array, not a single string. So length isn't a thing for a string array. I need the current string from A, which is A at I. And I need the current string from B, which is B at I. And there we go. Okay. With that, we're going to pause with our CodingBat practice. I'll see you in the next one.